Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Liverpool-born Australian jazz saxophonist and composer Ken Stubbs. We talked to him in the fall of 2020 during the worldwide COVID-19 pandemic about quite a bit, like his latest 2019 CD, Big Hush. He became involved with music after being reborn after a near-death experience. He was 14. It involved a football special train, hundreds of inebriated Glasgow Ranger fans, a fire hammer, an axe, 2 near fatalities, him jumping from a train traveling at 70 miles an hour, and several broken limbs. It was then that he decided that sports weren't it, and he was going to follow himself into the music. It's a great story. It's the beginning, and there's so much more. Enjoy. Thank you for taking some time out. I really appreciate it, and I want to start off by asking, we're in a very, especially here in America with all the racial unrest and COVID-19, very peculiar, surreal time on the planet. How have you been since this lockdown has happened, and what's been going on with you?
Well, I think we're very lucky, actually, where we are. We're on the east coast of Australia, in between, nearer to Brisbane, but north of Sydney, and it's very rural where we are. So I'm very near Byron Bay, which is a beautiful resort. But we've been in a real bubble, actually. I think in the whole of our kind of medical shire, since January, there have been about 54 cases and no deaths. And that's a huge area. It's like the size of Wales or England. You know, it's a huge area. And so, to be honest, apart from the fact that we can't cross the border, which is a slight problem because I teach up at the Brisbane Conservatorium, I've been doing all of that on Skype and Zoom. But apart from that, it's been life as normal for us. We've just been kind of shocked by seeing what's going on, especially in the States. But also, my daughter's in London. She's been affected by it, and it definitely seems to be a lot worse there. But yeah, you're right. Getting back to what you originally said, it's been quite scary to see what's going on in the States, with the COVID and what that's triggered off with other stuff as well. So but we're in a bubble, so we seem a long way away from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like whenever I talk to people in other parts of the world, there's more tranquility, there's more unification, there's more of what we ideologically wished would have happened in America back in March. But unfortunately, and I'm just not going to be filtered with this, we're being run by a madman right now. This guy is running our country into the ground in a way that I never thought was possible.
Yeah, well, I've always been quite interested in kind of, psychology and mythology, and it seems as if the tricksters have taken over at the moment, and it's even if you don't get personal about who they are, it's quite interesting to see that's where we're at the moment. The tricksters have, it's a bit like the court jesters have taken over.
Yeah. And, they certainly have.
And it shows us how precarious the whole thing is and what we've got to be careful of. But having said that, even though we've been in a bubble, people have had hardships here as well, whether it's travelling or, I've known people who've not been able to get to funerals and all this kind of stuff going on. Because, in fact, down in South Australia, in Melbourne, it's been pretty hard for them. But, as well as that, I was talking to somebody yesterday about all the positive stuff that's happened. Even I don't know whether this is a coincidence that we're connecting now, but for example, my family, we've had more connection with my family in the UK than we've ever had, because it's just been a catalyst for everybody to talk, and that's one of many positive things that seem to have come from this. And I guess it's a platitude, but there's always two sides to it.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think there's a lot of silver linings. I think there's a lot of things that can be construed as positive as well. But, with you and your career, you're unbelievably prolific. There's been so much that you've done and seen and produced in your career. How did all this begin for you? How did a kid from Liverpool get into jazz? Now you're in Australia. You're very accomplished. How did all this start?
I moved from Liverpool, actually, when I was in my early teens to a place north of Liverpool called Blackpool, which is an infamously kind of horrid holiday resort. I've been watching Boardwalk Empire, and I was introduced to Atlantic City, and it seems like it was a kind of 1970s version of that, except even more full of vice and dodginess. And but yeah, again, there was lots of positive things about that, you know. And it's probably not known in the US about this amazing connection that the north of England had at the time with the northern soul scene in Detroit, and I guess it was around that area. You know, Motown, I suppose, is the most prolific and well known of those labels, but there was a huge underground of smaller labels going on. There seemed to be literally thousands of artists, and for some reason, I think it's to do with this kind of, I don't know, some collective unconscious connection between kids in the north of England and the kind of black music scene in the north of America. But there was a huge scene called the Northern Soul music scene in England. And at first I thought it was the Northern Soul music scene because it was in the north of England, but it wasn't really. It was because it was from the northern states of America. And so I grew up with that, and it was an incredible kind of enthusiasm within the community of dancing and listening to soul music. And after a few years, I started to ask questions about what's that noise in the background, and you know, people would say, oh, that's a horn section, and they're trumpets, and that's a saxophone, trombone, etc. And I just said one day to my dad, who'd mentioned the saxophone. I think he'd secretly always wanted to be a saxophone player, but he was a coal miner, so it made it tricky. He said, yeah, that's a sax. And I immediately said, right, that's it. I want one. So that was the beginning. I think I was about 14 at the time. That was the beginning of the kind of love that I had. And I was really lucky at the time. There was a DJ in Blackpool who, it was one of those shops where you'd go and hang out on a Saturday morning, and he'd play tracks, and lots of people would pop in and out. And he was predominantly a Northern Soul DJ, but I think he realised with me that I was slightly more interested in the kind of more weird or outside stuff, and he kind of latched onto me and started putting records my way that he thought I might have liked. And it started off with, you know, like, I guess jazz fusion stuff like Chick Corea and Return to Forever and Weather Report, which I kind of liked at the time, but maybe wasn't ready for. And then one day he handed me a Horace Silver album, a Blue Note one. It was one of those ones that was current at the time. It was the late kind of Blue Note era, and it was called Silver and Wood, which I think was from a 4-set that he did with voices and percussion and all sorts of stuff. And it had people who then started to become heroes of mine, like Bob Berg and Tom Harrell and Ron Carter. And I fell in love with this album, and really that was it. From that moment, I just was in a situation of searching and checking out as much of the history of the jazz music that I could find at the time. Of course, at that time it was all on vinyl, so it was a slow process because they were all expensive. You know, buying one album was like a treat for the month, say. But that was it. Yeah, that's how it started. And I started playing, and within a few years after leaving school, I went to Salford College to do a music diploma, and then got into the kind of professional music business. And then in my late teens, moved down to London, and that's when things kind of started to take off in terms of playing jazz anyway.
Now, when you did finally hit the stage, were you nervous? Is it a second home for you? How do you approach the stage?
Well, I wouldn't say I was nervous at first. I think I was too kind of, you know, I had that, especially where I was from, I had a kind of streetwise cockiness that was probably way over the top. So it wasn't really it wasn't nerves that was the predominant feeling that I had when I started playing live. It was a huge disappointment, actually, from the point of view of sound. It's always been a real kind of the psychoacoustic aspect has always been really a battle for me. I think because the music that I like to play and have really always enjoyed listening to is acoustic, as opposed to playing fusion music with electronic instruments. I was always trying to listen. I've always been affected by the timbre and the overtones, and I spent so much time up against the wall with my saxophone, really trying to develop a sound. And every time I'd go and do a gig in front of a cheap microphone with a kind of dodgy PA from the 1970s, I'd just feel like, wow, what's happened? It's disappeared. And so it wasn't exactly nerves, but it was always a tricky situation for me playing live. And of course, the smaller the venue, pubs and clubs were more tricky than playing concert halls, where that was taken care of a lot better.
The one thing too that was mentioned in your bio is at 14 you had a near-death experience.
Yeah, and it was semi-tongue-in-cheek, but in fact it was real. Yeah, I think I've seen plenty of information on YouTube to show that now it's become infamous, this kind of strange period in British culture where football hooliganism was rampant in the 1970s. There's been lots of movies and documentaries about it. And in fact, I heard last year that in Russia, before the World Cup, there are now gangs in Russia who model themselves on the 70s heroes of football hooliganism. And that was my encounter with it. I went on a train from Blackpool to Manchester to see Glasgow Rangers play, and during the trip, it crossed paths with the Glasgow Rangers fans, and they all got on the train. I was only 13 at the time, but they were, or 14, and they all seemed like mature blokes to me at the time. They were probably 18 or 20, and they were very, very drunk, and started some very violent fights, to the point where I actually followed my friend's lead and jumped off the train, which was going at full speed, and ended up damaging my leg and breaking my arms and things like that. And that was what then made me think, no, I'm more interested in staying at home and dancing to this soul music. So that, in some strange way, actually took me in the direction that led to me becoming a musician, which is kind of weird.
Well, it's a great story, and it's one of those things that I can totally visualize. I can't understand because I've never seen that. I mean, we see levels of, sports fans can get barbaric, and it can get very, very intense, and that's scary, and there's enough in that would make you say, hey, you know what, I don't think I want to get involved with that route in my life. But
yeah, well, getting back to what you said at the beginning of this conversation, it's that tribal, it brings out that tribal part of people's psyche, and it's quite bizarre. But for me, it was a great experience to find out about that early on, because it put me in good stead for being careful after that with being who I was involved with, and what kind of situation to avoid. And I always found that the people I was involved with music, whether it was dancing on a dance floor or being involved with in bands, they just seemed a lot more relaxed and peaceful, and just wanted to get on with playing, really. And that kind of suited me after what I'd been through. And because school was I tell my son about what life was like at school during the 1970s, and he can't believe it. He thinks that all of the teachers would now be in prison, and he'd probably be right. But so yeah, it was a relief. Music was a haven. I think that's what it was about the connection with the Northern American music scene. The kids just seemed to find this release from the kind of culture and the social stuff that was going on around them, and it was actually, you can actually find videos about the Northern Soul music scene on YouTube, and it's quite interesting to watch. I mean, it looks silly the way everybody was dressed. It's one of those kind of mad cult kind of things. But yeah, it was very enthusiastic, and there was a deep love, I think, for the music, and that had a profound effect on me, and it's never really gone away. I still feel the same way about music as I did when I started.
So, after all these years and all these miles you've traveled to be a musician, what do you like the best about being a musician?
I've managed somehow to not have to do a proper job, which, coming from a working class Liverpool background, just seems incredibly privileged. My dad was a really hard-working person, and he started off as a coal miner and ended up with a business, but worked incredibly hard. That's why we were in Blackpool. Actually, he had a cafe. My grandfather before him was a kind of blind piano tuner, and so having seen the members of my family and what they did, it just feels a massive privilege to do anything that doesn't entail a kind of really full-time, hard job that takes all of your time away. To have been able to, there's been times, especially in London, when there were real fallow patches work-wise, and I've done the odd job here and there. But I think it's really mainly that, to have found something that I've been so passionate and involved with for my whole life, and managed to have kind of steered away through it. Just seems like a real privileged existence in a way. So that's the main thing. And of course, just the actual process of playing music in itself is, whatever you want to call it, whether it's a form of meditation or whether it's a connection on some unconscious level that just gives people some kind of positive feeling. That's what it really has meant to me over the years anyway.
So when we do return to live music, and everybody is just probably about as anxious as they can be to get to that point, what do you hope both musician and the audience realizes about this time away from the live music scene?
Yeah, well, maybe this is part of that positive thing I was talking about, that, as you know, I'm pretty sure it's been the same all over the world over the last, say, 20 or 30 years, that the way there's just been this decline in the amount of venues that are around, and people seem more hesitant to go out, and they seem to almost be resentful about paying for music, whether it's recorded or live. Seems to be this whole sway, and I think that's also been connected to the culture of media and the technology, which again is a double-edged sword, but I think it's going to take something like what's happened over the since the beginning of 2020 for people to realise what they've missed in a way, and to realise that being in a community situation, listening to music, is one of those really important, kind of ancient rituals that we do, that we need in our lives, and not just. There's many of those things, but one of those things I think is to do with music or dance or whatever it may be, in its involvement with music. So I'm hoping that people will start to appreciate music and realise that it's again, already people have talked to me about that. During this period, that they've said, "Oh, wow! I've had so much time. I've been listening to all of this music that I never used to listen to." Or musicians saying they've done more practice or more composing than they've ever done before. So I'm hoping that it's those kind of results that will come from this as a catalyst, kind of.
I appreciate the music that you sent over, and I got a question. There's a vibe, there's a feeling that you have in your music, and I want to know, especially with your latest CD, Big Hush, what do you want the listener to get from the experience of buying your music, downloading it, getting a CD, and going through the experience? What do you want them to feel from that?
Well, I'd really like them to feel what I feel when I'm doing it, in a way, that it's an unconscious, that it's coming through. It comes through musicians, that they're a vessel for feelings to come through the music, and the music I'm particularly involved in now it's quite, without getting too technical, I'm sure a lot of people will understand this, but it's very harmonically rich. And for me, the vehicle, the emotional aspect of music travels through is really the harmony. At least that's the way I hear it. And I think historically, that's the way composers seem to treat harmony as a vehicle for that feeling aspect of music. And so you may have noticed on those recordings that there is a spectrum of different feels and grooves and sounds and harmony, but really the common the thing that binds them all together is really quite a deep, and probably what people might say is quite a dark kind of atmosphere that's being communicated, and that's exactly what I'm after. And I'm aware that some people may find that challenging because not everybody wants to take on that side of themselves, or that side of the psyche, but that's where I'm coming from a kind of, I suppose the best way for me to describe it would be my own experience of hearing that through other musicians was really when I first heard John Coltrane. And it wasn't really the early stuff that he did with Miles and the bebop embedded, if you like, music. It was really when he started playing in what I would consider his golden era, which was with the quartet with Elvin Jones and McCoy Tyner and Jimmy Garrison. And what I heard in that was uncanny. It was the first time in my life that I'd ever been moved by anything abstract like that, where it just had such a profound, deep effect on the way I felt. And I've always been chasing that in a way, trying to convey that same thing that those musicians managed to put it. For me, that's the pinnacle of that essence of whatever it is I'm talking about.
So, speaking of the essence, everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans, but you're the one that's living your life. Who do you think you are?
Oh, wow, that's quite profound. Who do I think I am? Well, to start off with, I'm feeling better about who I am the older I get. So I'm quite happy about that, because for all the reasons I mentioned early on in life, life seemed harder earlier. And I'm on the phone to my daughter in London regularly. She's 20 and nearly 21, and I can see her now living the 20-something life in London and thinking, oh, I'm glad I'm not there. I mean, it's so exciting for her, and there's all of this madness going on, but I think, yeah, okay, nice, but I'm really glad not to be involved with that. And so, having moved to Australia, and we actually came here on holiday and came up to where we live it's actually subtropical rainforest. And it was almost as profound as the Coltrane experience when I experienced the beauty of the nature where we live. To go to a rainforest for me was like spellbinding magic. It was just, wow, what is this feeling? It was like falling in love. It really was. And except that I've never fallen out of love with it over the last 20 years. And so that is one of the major strands of who I am, I'd say. I'm a person that needs to live in nature and be a musician. And the other thing, and now having waited a long time, I didn't get married or have a family till I was almost 40. And so again, that's the other major strand now. I'm realizing what a great thing that is for me anyway. So yeah, I guess I've found found some major strands of who I am. So that's who I am. A musician in a family in a beautiful place in Australia.
Beautiful. Ken, hey, thanks again for reaching out. Thanks for the music. Stay safe out there, and we look forward to seeing all you guys whenever this gets back.
Great, man. Well, thanks for inviting me, and good luck with it all. And I'd love to see Kansas sometime.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in England, Australia, America, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Ken for his time, story, and music. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit Neon Jazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.